Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the daily discussion for the 30th of September, 2014. If you have any ideas for topics, you can leave them in the comments below, or use the links in the description to contact me. My name is Tusky, and today we shall be discussing a comment by MRazorK10, who says, an idea for a topic could be your stance on other popular MMOs on the market right now, or in the recent past, like Rift, Lord of the Rings Online, Arcade, Guild Wars 2, and whatnot. I'm also wondering, what are your feelings about tab target versus action MMOs, so Guild Wars 2 or Terra Online? So, thank you for the comment, MRazorK10. Let's have a chat about some other MMOs on the market right now, because there are a lot of MMOs out there at the moment. It's really very easy to get your hands on an MMO these days, and there's a lot to choose from, and some of them have some really interesting ideas behind them. Some of them, in my opinion, don't, or they just don't interest me that much. So, before I start with this, let it be known that this is my opinion alone. Do not take this as some kind of recommendation. Do not take it as anything other than my opinion. It's just my opinion. It's what I think about the different games. So just take it with a mountain of salt, okay? I have played some games more than others, and some I haven't played at all. So if I say I haven't played it, just calm, just relax, because I know there's going to be someone out there who's like, oh, he likes this game, I should buy this game, or he doesn't like this game, he's a terrible person. It's just my opinion, okay? So let's get on with it. So we will start with Rift. Now, I know just about nothing about Rift, except I watched Total Biscuit's video about it when it first came out, or when it was in beta. That was a long time ago. And I recall him saying that it felt a bit like a WoW clone. It was the first real WoW clone. I'm using air quotes right now. The first real WoW clone. It felt very similar. A lot of the spells and talents were very similar, if not identical, to some of the spells and talents in World of Warcraft. And it didn't really have anything that was too different from World of Warcraft other than the aesthetic. I may be incorrect there. I'm just saying I might be wrong about that, but that's what I know about Rift. And I know it's free-to-play, and I'm not a huge fan of completely free-to-play MMOs, because I just think that it's not a good idea, because it's a great way to just take money in lots of weird and different ways, and if the company is not to be trusted, which unfortunately is happening more and more these days, then it's kinda sucks, really. So that's all I know about Rift. All I know is it's free-to-play, and I'm not that interested in it, because it doesn't look that interesting to me. So, onto the Lord of the Rings Online. Now, this is a game I tried to get into. I have played it a little bit, only like a couple of hours. Like, I couldn't get past the starting experience. I mean, a lot of people say that it's a great game for Lord of the Rings fans, and I am a Lord of the Rings fan. I love the movies, I love the books, although it has been a long time since I read the books. Funny little side story here. The first book that I remember being read was my grandmother reading me The Fellowship of the Ring when I was, like, 6. I vividly recall that for some reason. I had no idea what the hell she was saying, but hey, eventually I ended up going back to those books and enjoying them, although I don't really remember them that well. Anyway, so the Lord of the Rings Online, I couldn't get into it. I wasn't a big fan of its combat, I just think it was very clunky, the animations just weren't there, and the textures were a bit all over the place. That's all I remember of it. I remember that I couldn't get into it, and that it didn't grip me, because it was just... Again, I'm going to use the phrase, a bit like WoW. I'm just going to say that. I'm not going to say WoW clone, I'm just going to say it's a bit too much like World of Warcraft. Because when you go from World of Warcraft to another MMO, you really want something different. Hopefully you want something different. So that's all I know about Lord of the Rings Online. Apparently it's still going, which is great, and I think it's free to play. I'm pretty sure it's free to play, although there are different subscriptions and all that stuff. Same with Rift, you can do that. But as far as I know, the Lord of the Rings Online is not something I'm interested in, and... Really, I suppose one of those big things is that there's only one faction. I'm not a massive fan of games that only have one faction, although there is a big exception to that, and I will talk about that later. But I think that having two different factions is very good in terms of making PvP work. I know there's some kind of system where you can play as a bad guy depending on how good your main guy is. I don't know. Obviously, I don't know this all that well, but it doesn't interest me. That's the point. The idea of spending all the time grinding on like a hobbit or a human or an elf, only to then say, okay, now that I've got to level 30, let's just say 30. Now that I've got to level 30 as an elf, I can make a level 1 orc. It just seems a bit arbitrary, and I don't even know what kind of storylines or what kind of things that you can do as the other faction. I heard once that it may only be PvP. They probably changed it since then, but I'm not all that interested in it, to be honest. And I think The Lord of the Rings was, for me, it was the 3 books and the 3 movies. And to a lesser extent, The Hobbit. I do love The Hobbit, and I'm looking forward to the next Hobbit movie, I have to say. It's more Lord of the Rings stuff, but I don't care. It's good old generic fantasy done very well. And so I'm looking forward to the movie, but Lord of the Rings Online, not so much. So moving on to Star Wars The Old Republic. Now, this one I have played for a little bit, and I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it for quite a while, because Star Wars The Old Republic has a big advantage over other MMOs. It is made by BioWare, and it is written by BioWare, and if you have played Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3, or any of the Dragon Age games, then you will know BioWare are damn good at writing, and they're good at making stories, and making lots of different decisions, and having branching conversation trees and all that stuff. So, the idea of an MMO where every quest is introduced like that, and your decisions can affect how the quest pans out, that blew my mind. I thought, whoa, that's so cool, and it's in the Star Wars universe, even better. I can be a Sith Lord, I can be a Jedi Knight, I could be a Jedi Consular, I could be a mercenary, an Imperial Inquisitor, and it's just like, oh, so good. I was so excited about that game, and it let me down. Not entirely, but mostly. Now, I will say this. Star Wars The Old Republic story was kick-ass. I loved it. I loved the story. I played as the Imperial Agent. That was the character that I ended up leveling almost entirely the way through, and I loved the story, because the Imperial Agent isn't all about, you know, I am evil, I am Sith, I am all that stuff. No, because it's all about politics, and balancing the needs of the Imperial citizenship, because you need citizens to be an empire, with the will of the Sith Lords. And there were points where you had a Sith Lord down your throat just going like, I want you to do this. If you don't do this, I will shut down your department and kill you. And you had to make important decisions, and you could be a fairly good guy, thinking about the citizens first and the Sith second. That would get you in trouble, though. It really would. And I loved it. It was loads of tension, and it was a brilliantly crafted story. I will say this, though. I didn't finish it. I didn't finish the story. And you'll think, bloody hell, why? You just ranted for like half a minute about how awesome the story was, and it was. It was really cool. But the gameplay let it down so hard. Really badly. I really think that the gameplay destroyed that game for me, because you have all of these wonderful stories, and you have so many different branching plot lines, and that was where the bulk of the game's budget and the bulk of the game's love went, I think. That's just my opinion. I think the most of it went there, and it left the gameplay being, and here we go again, very similar to World of Warcraft. It was button mashy and boring and not all that interesting, and it bored me. The gameplay just ended up boring me, because the quests, although they were really well presented with different kind of cutscenes and stories and things like that, when it got down to it, you go through... I ended on Hoth. This is the example I'm going to give you. I ended on Hoth, the ice planet, because that's when I just gave up. I couldn't have any more of it. So I went to Hoth, and I started doing the quests there. I had, say, 3 major parts of my player story there, my class story. And I had to, in between those, level up, which means I had to do generic quests. And they were presented very nicely with the cutscenes and all that stuff, like I said earlier. But once that was all over and done with, it was still go and kill 10 banthas, or go and talk to this person, go and deliver this, go and escort that. There was no interesting quests. The quests were boring as all hell. They really were. The NPCs just kind of stood around doing nothing, and it was so samey, and it took so long, and it bored me eventually. The gameplay bored me to death, which is such a shame, because I loved the story to death. I really did. I loved the story of Star Wars The Old Republic, and I played multiple different classes just to see their different story openings, and I progressed through like chapter 1 of pretty much every single class in that game, and I played it for quite a while, and I enjoyed it. I really did. I will say quickly, the space combat was very cool. It's a shame it was a rail shooter, because I think that there was loads of potential there, especially for some kind of multiplayer element. It looks really good. Like, the space combat in that game looked awesome. But unfortunately, the gameplay wasn't quite up to par. It was just kind of rail shooter, pew 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 pew, and occasionally use some missiles. That was a bit of a shame, because I thought otherwise it was really cool. And I also did a tiny, teeny bit of roleplay in the Star Wars The Old Republic. I barely touched roleplay in that game. But it kept my attention for a good few months, and after that, I just kind of dropped it because I got bored. That was it, unfortunately. I just ended up dropping it. So that's Star Wars The Old Republic, a game I really liked, but it didn't hold my attention very well with the gameplay. I believe it's free to play, although I hear it's very stringent with its free to play things, like you only have 1 bag and 1 action bar if you don't pay, which is just utter bullshit, in my opinion. It's just bollocks. It really is. It's bollocks of the highest order. And I think that's just a terrible way of doing free to play, but, you know, that's just my opinion. So that's Star Wars The Old Republic. Moving on to the next game on the list, Guild Wars 2. Now this game, I like. I like Guild Wars 2 a lot. And I will say this, it is the first game on this list that the combat is different from World of Warcraft. It's still, you've still got an action bar, you've still got weapons and you hit things, and it's all kind of similar like that, but it has some very key elements that are different. Very key elements which are different, which I love. I love that whole fact. And I love the gameplay. I really do. I love the way that, if you have a shield and a sword in your hand, you have a different skill set than if you had a shield and a mace, or a shield and an axe, or if you're a caster, it's different if you had a staff, a scepter, or a dagger, and it changed the way you play. I loved that. I thought it was so good, and I loved the combat in that game. I played Guild Wars 2 for probably 7 or 8 months, probably nearly a year, I would say. It was so enjoyable, because I was playing Guild Wars 2 while Mr. Pandaria was first released. I was in Guild Wars 2 during that point, as I mentioned in my Don't Spoil It beta spoilers video. I was in Guild Wars 2 when Mist released, so I was enjoying that game tremendously, and I loved the different parts of it. It really was a big wake-up call to the MMO industry, I think, Guild Wars 2, because it said, okay, we have dynamic quests where it's, okay, you can help these people by either killing things, collecting things, talking to people, you can play it as you want, and I think that's really cool, because there are times where it's like, okay, you need to help this town, it's got a bandit problem. So you don't just go out of camp and kill bandits. You can if you want, but you just have a bar. So it's like, okay, I have to go and help the bandit problem. So I can go and kill bandits. I can talk to townsfolk to help them prepare against bandit attacks and giving them weapons. I can go and find bandit hideouts and inform the guards. Or I can go and collect different supplies from different towns and hand them in. And that would all count towards completing the quest. And once you unlocked that quest, you unlocked a vendor. And I just think that's so cool. It also had really good dynamic grouping, where you didn't even have to be in a group with other people to kill things with them, and you just kind of made dynamic groups as you went along. It also felt very epic. There were a few scenarios in there where you fight some dragons and you fight some massive creatures that require groups of 30 or 40 people. Those were really fun. They really were. I enjoyed it thoroughly. So, gameplay-wise, A+. I loved Guild Wars 2. I also love the way that you could aim your abilities in that game. A lot of them you could just fire and go ahead with, but let's say you're a warrior, right? You have a big two-handed weapon. In World of Warcraft, if you charge and you're fighting 3 mobs, all of them fighting in front of you, and you use your auto-attack, it'll hit 1 enemy. And then you might use your ability Cleave, which will hit them all. In Guild Wars 2, if you're fighting the 3 enemies, your auto-attack, which, by the way, you more often than not would press rather than just leave there, which I love, by the way. I love the fact that you have to hit your own abilities rather than just let your character go ahead, which is why I love casters. And if you used your basic attack like that, which was like a 3-pronged attack that was each different each time, all of those abilities would hit guys in front of you, regardless of how many there were. And I think that's brilliant. It felt so much more alive, it felt more immersive, and there was loads of weight to it. The sounds, the smashes, the clangs of all the different weapons and the armor was brilliant. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So that's the gameplay of Guild Wars 2. The story and the lore was great. I loved the way they did story, although I think there wasn't enough story, and I think that there were a few janky cutscenes and areas where it wasn't really done as well as it could have been. There are quite a few areas where I think it could have been improved. It may have been improved now, and hopefully it is, which is good. So lore and story checks out good, and I just want to point out the Char, friggin' awesome. Just the Char are just awesome characters, big cat-like creatures, all about the war and the death and the honor in battle. Brilliant stuff. Like orcs, but cats. It's cool. And I have a cat. I love cats. So there you go. So Char, really cool. I didn't really play any of the races. I played a Char, and I loved the Char. So that's the characters. Classes were pretty good as well. Lots of different versions of that, and they all played differently depending on the weapons you had equipped, which is, again, really cool. And the dynamic, constant world events that they did, and are still doing, are awesome, I think. And they're constantly improving the game. They're constantly changing things up, which is good. I like that. I think that's awesome. And even now, I can go back to it if I wanted to play it. If I saw something that I really loved, I could just go back and play it, because it's a one-time buy, which is good, because I think you should do the one-time buy before you enter Guild Wars 2 or any other kind of MMO like that. And then you just have the game, and you have an item store where you can buy things like dyes, different transmogrification crystals, and different ways of improving your character. None of them are really buying power, which is good. And you can also get them in the game most of the time, which is also really good. So I love the way they do that free-to-play model there. You pay to enter the game, and then you have everything in the game. And you never have to subscribe. You never have to pay any money that you don't want to pay. So I like that about Guild Wars 2. I also did a bit of role-playing Guild Wars 2, which I'm really happy about. I was able to get into a kind of military guild, and I got quite attached to some of the characters there. I made some good friends there. It was all over on the EU side, though, so once the whole thing with America came around, I had to abandon it, which is a terrible shame. So that was Guild Wars 2. Absolutely recommend that game more than any other on this list, I think. So second to last game would be Wildstar, which is a fairly recent game that's come out, which is kind of a mixture of World of Warcraft and Guild Wars 2. And I don't want to talk too much about it because I did cover it a little bit on the channel, and I do have some footage of it on the channel, so if you want to see some thoughts about that, you can find that on the channel, and I'll put a link in the description below. But WildStar had a massive advantage, I think, because it set out not to take the MMO world by storm, but instead to just be a really high-quality MMO. And I think in that regard, it succeeded, because WildStar was a lot of fun when I played it. The action combat where every single ability is aimed, every single one was aimed and had a target box, which is awesome. I think that's a great way of providing a lot of feedback and upping the skill ceiling. That was great. The combat felt really fun, the different classes felt varied, although I think there could have been a little bit more of them and a little bit more variety in the race class combos, because I played a Draken and they could only have access to 3 classes, the Stalker, the Warrior, and the Spellslinger, and I think that it would have been cool for them to have a few more options, but that's just my opinion. And other than that, I think the races are really cool, and there's plenty of options. There's the 2 factions, which is good, and there are loads of different ways that game is awesome. I mean, its sense of humor is amazing. WildStar's sense of humor is awesome. If you love a good sci-fi Saturday morning cartoon adventure, then I would suggest WildStar. I really would. It's great fun. The lore is pretty good. It takes a while for things to get started, but once you latch onto things, it gets quite interesting, and it's got a lot of skill to it. It can be quite difficult leveling sometimes, because there are mobs out there that will kick your ass, especially in some of the later story areas. There's a lot of puzzles, and there's a lot of elite bosses that can be difficult. You have to be on top of things to do really well in that game. I also did a little bit of roleplay with WildStar, which was enjoyable. I didn't do as much as I could have, I think, and I ended up just drifting away from it and the game in general, really, to focus on the channel and focus on World of Warcraft, because the main downside I had with WildStar was the fact that every time I played it, I thought, this is great, but it makes me want to play WoW. That was the main problem. I loved WildStar, and I still love WildStar, but as I said in the past, I just love WoW more, and it made me miss WoW, which is really strange, but also kind of good for the channel, I suppose. It really reinvigorated my love for World of Warcraft, which is good, but I would suggest WildStar if you have the money for it, and this is a massive downside. WildStar has to be paid for to get the game, and then you have to have a subscription fee as well, which really sucks. There is a way of getting game time from playing the game, but it is very grindy, really damn grindy, so be wary of that. It will cost a lot of money, but it is fun, and it will keep you busy for a very long time, which is awesome. Also, the dungeons and raids in that game are insanely hard. Like, insane. Like, the 5-man dungeons in that game are akin to raids in World of Warcraft, like normal mode raids. You can't pug it. Well, you can, but expect to get stomped into the ground pretty damn hard. And raids, I don't even want to think about that. I never even got to that point. And really, once I got to the maximum level of WildStar, I felt like I was done. I didn't really feel like I wanted to do the grind, and that's it. That's just it. I mean, I didn't want to do the grind. So I ended up gravitating away from WildStar and back towards WoW, to focus on the channel and to focus on just playing it and getting ready for Warlords of Draenor. Also, one other note about Guild Wars 2, I just want to jump back to that quickly, is that the endgame of Guild Wars 2 isn't that grand. It kind of sucked for me. So Guild Wars 2 is a great game, I think, for getting to the level cap of 80, which is a lot of levels, and you'll get to explore the world all very organically, and it's very fun. But once you hit the maximum level and you run out of exploration stuff, it can grow a little bit stale, so just be wary of that fact. But back to WildStar quickly. So combat, A+, story pretty damn good, roleplay factor was fun, I enjoyed the roleplay of it, and the aesthetic is good, it's very cartoony, and I love that fact, I love its art style, and the sense of humor is just damn awesome. It really is. It's so funny. Like, the different ways that the announcer, who happens to be the voice actor for Lore Walker Cho, just so you know, the different ways that that narrator congratulates you when you level up is just amazing. There's one for almost every single level, and he'll just be like, oh yeah! And etc. things like that. It's so funny, and it's just so awesome. I would suggest WildStar if you can afford it, because that subscription fee is one of its biggest downsides. If WildStar ever goes free to play, oh my goodness, yes, get it. If it ever goes down in price, I would definitely suggest it, because it's a lot of fun. So we've gone through Rift, Lord of the Rings Online, Star Wars The Old Republic, Guild Wars 2, and WildStar. And I've had pretty good things to say about some of the recent ones, and kind of mixed thoughts on the others. This next one is going to be a bit different. ArcAge. Oh boy, ArcAge. This is a game that I was basically told to play when I was doing the Curse contract, because it was an up-and-coming MMO and they wanted me to make videos about it. And, oh goodness gracious me, I'm just going to say this right out of the gate. I hate ArcAge. I really do. I hate that game so much. I will start by saying this. It's kind of an Eastern Asian style game. I'm not sure who it's by or anything like that. It's kind of that style of game, and I am not interested in those styles of games. I've never played Final Fantasy. I've never really got into anime or anything like that. It's just not my cup of tea. But I was kind of forced to play it for the curse contract, so I went ahead and did that. And it was a terrible slog. There are some upsides to Arcade. Let's get those out of the way. First of all, it's not that bad of a looking game. The art style is okay. The animations are atrocious, but, you know, positive time. I liked the way that the mount system worked. You had to look after your mounts, and they were kind of like pets that would follow you around, and you could actually attack from on top of them, which was cool. I liked that. I kind of liked the skill system, the combat system, not the combat system, the skill system, where some of your skills would combine with one another. So, for instance, if you played a mage type character and you set something on fire, if you then used an ice ability on it, it would deal bonus damage. Or if you were some kind of auramancer and you used some kind of disorient on the enemy and then followed it with a heal, your heal would be stronger or have a smaller cast time or cost less mana. So I think that system is kind of cool, that you can create combos by yourself, which is kind of cool, but pretty much everything else I hated. I hated the animations, I hated the quests, they were so vanilla and so boring. I hated the story because it was so convoluted and so all over the place. It was just abysmal, the story, in my opinion. It was just convoluted cliche after convoluted cliche with no sense of humor to it. You start with a single voiceover with no music that does the kind of moving image thing, not done that well, by the way. Like Lords of War does it 100 times better. So think Lords of War, but with a worse narration and with really terrible graphics. It's just kind of zooming in and out of one big picture. That's what the introduction cinematics and pretty much all of the other cinematics in the game are. And you are told things as you go through this. Like, for instance, there's one point where I played as the Firin, which is... That's another point, actually, quickly before I move on. The race selection is terrible because you can have a human, an elf, a cat person, or a human. And I know you said, oh, but Tusky in Guild Wars 2, you loved the Char. But there's a difference. The Guild Wars 2 in Char looked quite feral. The Firin in Arcade looked like humans cosplaying. That's how Ellie-Shan of my guild put it when he saw it. And that's just it. And a quick note on the body designs of the females. Absolutely terrible is the only way I can put it. All right, so what was I saying? So Firin's storyline. I was going through that, and at one point, I come across a necromancer, and I'm like, oh, it's a necromancer. And so I kill him, and then a cutscene begins, and it says, you've always known that necromancy has been terribly outlawed in the Firin tribes. And I'm just like, no, I didn't. I didn't know that. You've just told me now, and you've told my character that I know something, but I don't. Why didn't you have it as part of the world? You know, as when you're in the first village, you hear people saying like, oh, I hear that person's practicing necromancy. He could get exiled for that. That's all you needed. Is some people just talking about it, something in the world or the quests or some kind of coherent narrative to link things together. As it stands, it's just a convoluted mess. That's all I got out of it. It's a convoluted mess. And apparently I'm getting this all wrong. From what I've heard about the game and from what I've heard from other people, apparently the game is all about the sandbox, all about the freedom. So you can build houses just about anywhere. And if you have enough supplies and enough workforce, you can build a castle and you can have a politics system and you can trade and you can go on all kinds of different missions. You can become a pirate, you can go to jail, you can get sentenced, which is a terrible idea, by the way, because I was in a constant chat channel called the Judge channel or something like that, or the Trial channel, and every now and then an automatic judge would pop up saying, we're beginning the trial of XX Sephiroth XX, and this is his crime. And you'd have players randomly picked to act as the jury to decide what his fate would be. And every single time it was a bunch of swearing and everyone saying, guilty, 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 guilty. I played that game for probably about 60 hours, and never once did I see a not guilty charge. Because that's what players are like. Also, another really weird thing is that they're a collision with all NPCs and players. You can't run through anything, which sounds cool at first glance. I mean, you can do things like, you know, when you're going down a road and you see some people going the other way, you have to actually get out of their way. If someone's on a mountain, they're running through, you have to just kind of step to the side. And that's kind of cool when it works. And it all works nicely until you go AFK. Because I was doing my quests at one point, and I saw someone who was AFK. And I was like, oh, someone's AFK. I can finally see whether or not you can bump into other players, because I never really got the chance to before. So I ran into him, this one player, and I bounced off him. You know, I couldn't go through him. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. That's okay. That could be kind of griefed if someone surrounded you completely. If like 3 or 4 players surrounded you, you just couldn't get out without teleporting, without using some kind of cooldown or some reagents. But then, as I was walking into this person, he started to move. Not because he was actually moving, he was still AFK. I was physically moving the person by running against them. That's just got a terrible potential to it. It really does. So, gameplay of Arcade, quite lackluster. Really got to be said. The quest design was just boring, the story was terrible, the animations were all over the place, the immersion wasn't there. It does have a few redeeming qualities, but I never quite got to them because you can farm. No, quite literally, you can become a farmer. No, I'm not interested in being a farmer, okay? You can make a house. I'm not that interested in making a house because WildStar made housing, and I never even talked about the housing in WildStar. That was really good. The housing in WildStar, A+. Best housing in the MMO industry, hands down. That's what I think. And in Arcade, you can make your own house. Okay, that's not that interesting to me. I'm not really interested in making houses, to be honest. You can also become pirates, you can enter guild wars, and you can enter, political intrigue and stuff like that, and that's all cool. But here's the problem. To get to that point, you have to reach the maximum level. And you can't do that without hundreds of hours of terrible grinding in the quest system, which is just boring. And that makes no sense to me. If you've got all these great features of your game, why delay them for so long? Why have such a generic starting experience? If you've got all these sandbox systems in play, why don't you take the time to actually introduce them and make them interesting really early on into the game? Because at about level 10, I got introduced to the housing system, or really I was allowed to look at a few houses, and I was given a mount, and that was cool. But after that, it just kind of walked away, and I didn't have anything more to do with it. And then a couple levels later, I looked at farming, and it had me do a bit of public farming, which was okay, I suppose. And then it just dropped it, and it said, oh, if you want to put a farm somewhere, go ahead and do that. And I never bothered because it was the beta and things were going to get wiped, so I wanted to see how far into the game I could get. But it was just constant grinding, and it was so boring. I think the only reason you would like Arcade, and I believe it's a free-to-play game. I believe it's free-to-play. I might be wrong. There is an item store in it, of course, with all kinds of different transmogging and different services and all that stuff. So it has an item store, but the only people who would like Arcade, I think, are people who really want a kind of immersive sandbox MMO. And that's not what I want at the moment, I'm afraid. It's just not what I want. I was forced to go into that game for Curse, and it was a nightmare. It really was, and I'm glad I was able to talk about it here, because I just ranted for half an hour. So, yeah, that was Arcade. I want to forget it. It was absolutely terrible. I would not suggest it. But again, take that with a mountain of salt, because I have my own opinions, I have my own likes and dislikes, and they may differ from yours. They will probably differ from yours. Try it yourself. I mean, it will be free to play, so what harm can it do? So finally, let's quickly talk about the tab target versus action MMOs. So I think they both have their place, because as you've probably noticed, Guild Wars 2 and WildStar, both games that I really loved and I praised their combat, were both action MMOs, which is great. I think action MMOs are really interesting, and I think they are the future. I really do, because tab target hotkey MMOs just aren't that interesting anymore. World of Warcraft gets away with it because it is World of Warcraft. It's done it for ages, and it has done it really damn well. It really has. World of Warcraft's combat is top-notch. It really is. And that's why it gets away with it. Any other MMO that copies it, I think, won't get away with it, because they have not got all the polish that World of Warcraft has. So if a game wants to be successful these days, if an MMO, a new MMO wants to be successful, I think it has to be an action MMO. And it has to have really fun, gripping combat right from the start. Guild Wars 2 did that, and WildStar did that. And I believe that any new MMO has to come out really strong at the start in order to keep people's attention. And it has to bring that all the way to the end game and then evolve the end game in some kind of interesting way by having either really great challenge, by changing things up in some way, or by just making things more interesting and elaborate at the maximum level. That is how it will succeed. And I think that new MMOs that come out, like the cancelled Titan project, that was probably going to be an action MMO. And any MMO that Blizzard releases from now on, the one that they'll replace after World of Warcraft is dead and buried, that will also be an action MMO. So I think that it's going to be something you're going to have to get used to. If you don't like action MMOs, I'm sorry, but they really are where the future is, because the combat in action MMOs is so damn good. You feel connected to the character. Because for instance, let's say you play a warrior in World of Warcraft, or Arcade, God forbid. So you use your swing ability, and your character swings his sword and deals, like, damage to the enemy character, right, that he's targeting. And it's all about the numbers. If you have higher numbers than the enemy, if you hit harder, or if you have more health, or if you out-heal them, you win. That's how it works. In an action MMO, you've still got aspects of that. If you swing your sword, though, your character actually swings the sword. And you see the arc, and that arc will deal damage to anything in it. Like I said earlier with Guild Wars 2, if you swing your weapon with your auto attack, you will hit any enemies in front of you. And it's just like that with WildStar as well. You can hit multiple enemies with your attacks in front of you. So it really kind of hammers home the feedback of being that character, because, and this is the thing, I've talked about the lore and the story and the aesthetics and the gameplay of each of these different MMOs. But really, it is that last one that is the most important. It is the gameplay, because that is what you will be doing for hundreds of hours on end, the gameplay. And the gameplay has to be fun, interesting, challenging and action-packed, really. It has to make you feel like you are the character. Because when you're slumped in front of your PC, staring down into the monitor and getting completely immersed into the game, it's so much easier to do that when your character is swinging the sword and you feel the impact. You hear the really loud thunk as your character hits the enemies, and you hear the roars and the smashes, and the combat is visceral and fun, and you want to just keep doing it for the sake of doing it, even if you don't want to do quests. Because that's how I felt with WildStar and Guild Wars 2. I was like, oh, well, I finished this quest, but hell, I could kill some more enemies with this combat system. I'm going to do that. And a combat system that does that is a combat system that succeeds. And I think that World of Warcraft is the only tab target hotkey MMO that has ever made me do that with combat that is not action MMO combat. So like I said, action MMOs are the future, in my opinion. So that will conclude this rather long rant. This daily discussion has been about twice as long as other daily discussions, so hopefully it made up for the lower quality, I would say, of yesterday's daily discussion. Hopefully I made that up to you guys. So that will conclude it for today. That's it for today's daily discussion. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you have any suggestions for topics, or you wish to send me your questions to answer on the daily discussion, you can contact me using the links in the description, or you can just leave a comment. Thank you very much for watching, and I wish you the best of luck with your gaming endeavours.